Yo, what is up, everybody? Oresco back again with another story from the collection called Macabre Minds, written by Auntie Heart. Remember to check out the links in the description, show love to the author, like, comment, and subscribe. Story 4, The Ultimate Prize. Garden Square Nursing Home was both cheerful and desperately decrepit at the same time. Flowers hung in baskets on the front porch, inviting the public in with an attempt to bring color and vividness to the decaying building. But mosquitoes still buzzed about the water fountains, biting at the elderly that sat motionless and disconsolate on the porch. The grass was emerald green, and a couple of the younger residents watched their gown children roll on about it. But it was still a stark contrast against the peeling paint of the building. Once white, now a delicate brown. I had volunteered in nursing homes before, but I had put off volunteering at Garden Square due to the fact that my grandpa Mike lived there. I didn't want to see the horrors I knew I would find. I didn't want sadness to cling to this place like it did to the other nursing homes I had volunteered at. All nursing homes had their secrets and their troubles, and I just wanted to believe that Grandpa lived in a place that was somehow better than the rest. How naive I was to think that. I spent my first few weeks volunteering, just tending to the flowers and immaculate lawn. Although I sported more than a few bugs, I became known as the Flower Girl, and I rejoiced in the title. The residents seemed to love my passion for the dainty flowers and blades of grass, and I would talk to them as I weeded the lawn, watered the flowers. They were grateful for the company I think I was able to bring them. I wasn't much, but I was still your Flower Girl. Grandpa was always silent when I went to visit him. He hadn't spoken in years, and the doctors just suspected it was a personal choice rather than some physical phenomenon. But he still gave me sad hugs, kissed me on the cheek, smiling and nodding at my little garden. He was proud of me, and words weren't needed to tell me that. But still, Grandpa was a very unhappy man. I would comfort him most nights as he sobbed silently into his once pristine pillow, and I would often have to drag him out of bed just to go eat. He wouldn't tell me the cause of his obvious distress, but it started to give Garden Square a more ominous milieu. I hate to admit it, but I began going there less and less. There was something off about Garden Square, something that crept about in the shadows and married the slight beauty with sinister intention. I guess I first started to notice that something was amiss when the residents began to die off, at least once a week, and the halls seemed haunted with their ghosts. The residents hardly seemed to notice or care, and that was disturbing enough, especially when my grandpa took over a dead lady's large suite room. He wasn't any happier due to the change of scenery, but the thought of sleeping in a deceased presence did not seem to bother him at all. "This was just the way it is," he seemed to tell me. "There's just no other way." I like to believe that he was wrong, but sometimes I wonder, and that keeps me up at night, screaming. But still, I volunteered at Garden Square, burying my anxiety and chalking it up to the insanity that sometimes clouded my mind. The residents were nice, and despite the high mortality rate, staff truly seemed to care for if not the building, for their charges. I decided to stick out the volunteer position, relishing at the time I spent with Grandpa and his friends. I chose to continue to work at the decrepit, haunting building. This wakes me up in the middle of the night too. I should have trusted my gut, that little voice that was telling me that all was not well. I should have listened to the ghosts that roam the halls, telling me to tuck tail and run as far away as possible. But still, I volunteered to call bingo. It was a chilly night. The elderly were wrapped in shawls and wool jackets to keep them warm. They sat at the round tables with their bingo cards and markers in their hands, looking at me seriously when I smiled broadly at them. Hi, my name is Michelle, and I'll be your bingo caller tonight.
Yeah, where's Tony? She's always the one calling bingo. Yeah, where's Tony? We want Tony!
I felt my lips twitching from the effort to hold back my smile. Tony is sick, and she asked to call bingo tonight, so I'm sorry, but I promise this won't be an everyday occurrence. The game itself was incredibly serious. The elderly sat, hunched over their cards, glaring at me when I stammered over a number and verbally calling me out when I wasn't being loud enough. One lady even began to cry, saying this was the most bored she's ever been playing bingo. One lady even fell asleep on me. But I still held my composure, grinning like we were best friends in the middle of a non-threatening game. It went on normally enough, the few residents winning plushies, some scarves that had been donated a few days prior. It wasn't until we got to the last game of the night, Blackout, that I really grew exhausted. The residents had stopped badgering me about my poor bingo calling skills, but they took on a look of complete concentration that bordered on distress. Some of the women actually began to cry when I called out their numbers. Few told them to shut up. Despite the odd tenseness that permeated the atmosphere, I continued calling, till one of the men held up his card, smiling sadly up at me. Grandpa had won the ultimate prize. I helped assist some of the elderly back to their rooms, leaving Grandpa to claim his reward. He sat silently at this table, looking at his full bingo card, appearing for all the world like a ghost lost in its own home, unable to pass on. The disconsolate, melancholy expression did little to ease a strange, growing panic in my chest. I had seen Grandpa sad, but never as frighteningly depressed as he was in that moment. I sat next to him, asking him what was troubling him, but he just wrapped my hand up in his and gave me a miserable, tiny smile. Of course, he didn't speak. I would never hear his voice again. A nurse came into the room, a pretty girl with long black hair, and she grinned at Grandpa. "Are you ready, Mr. Tolman?" I felt so uneasy. I grasped my Grandpa's hand tighter, but he just patted me on the shoulder, nodded, and rose up from the table, letting go of my grip. What's going on?" I asked. That unknown panic rooted deep in my chest, threatening to burst. It was ludicrous. Grandpa had just won a bingo game, and there was nothing sinister about that. The nurse glanced me over, simply smiling. Michelle, how long have you been here now? About a year, why? And he's your grandfather, yes? Why was I so nervous? Or why were my palms sweating? Yes, now, what's going on? Michelle, I think you might have to come with us. He is your grandfather after all, and he just won the ultimate prize. Dread settled in like a bowling ball in my stomach. But Grandpa was already slowly shambling after the nurse. So I got up and followed like a well-trained dog. We tread down the hallway to a door that read, "Employees only." I had never ventured through this particular door, for a strange odor seemed to emanate from it, along with that sense of darkness I'd felt ever since I began volunteering at the nursing home. It exuded an inky blackness, and I was hesitant to enter the shadowy corridor once the door opened. Something, call it instinct, was telling me to turn away. But familial love made me continue to follow Grandpa and the nurse down the hall. I was led into a dusty, smelly room with peeling paint. It was dark and unremarkable, all except for a chair with restraints that stood in the middle. A few shelves were set up around the room, and I noticed with a leap in my heart that needles and some guns sat on them. What was a nursing home doing with this ghastly paraphernalia? I do not know. Horror made me take a few steps back, and it made me contemplate just running out of the room and dialing 911. But my feet would not move anymore, and I felt rooted to the spot as though I had been planted as a tree. I shook my head slowly. This dread I felt, none of this could be happening, could it? The nurse looked at Grandpa and smiled consolingly at him. "So, what will it be, Mr. Tolman?" What was she speaking of? I only had an inkling of suspicion, but Grandpa knew. He pointed to the guns on one of the polished shelves, and the nurse grinned wider. I'd never seen such an inhumane smile before. Firing squad? What a bold choice. With those words, the nurse grabbed 2 guns and gave one to my trembling, unwilling hands. She held hers expertly, and she explained the situation to my ears, ringing from the ludicrousness of the situation. Look, one of these guns is loaded, the other is not. On the count of 3, we fire, and your grandfather will die. She said this as though we were discussing the weather. I stared at her with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I don't understand. What is there not to get? Everything. I don't want Grandpa to die. At this point, tears began rolling down Grandpa's sunken cheeks, and the nurse looked at me with what appeared to be pity. "Oh, Michelle, this is the ultimate prize, and your grandfather wants it. Isn't that right, Mr. Tolman?" I glanced with terror at Grandpa, who nodded ever so slightly. Something in me snapped at that moment. I took a few more steps down into the corridor. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, and I was already going through the motions with my fingers to dial the police. Assisted suicide? I loved Grandpa. Although old, his life was of value, at least to me. I couldn't imagine seeing his blood paint on the back of a wall. I couldn't even think of his body crumpling to the ground. I wouldn't allow it. No, I refuse, I said, more adamantly. They usually do when it's their first time. Look, I have a proposition for you, Miss Tillman. I don't want anything to do with what's going on down here. I want to leave. Oh, but Michelle, just hear me out. I can save your grandfather's life. You would just listen. Her breath was tickling my neck, and I froze again. Something about her voice. She was making a genuine offer. Look, I'll let you shoot your gun first, Michelle. If it's blank, I'll let your grandfather live. If it's not, well, you know what happens after that. My heart raced. Sweat pooled in my hands and my forehead. So was this then? Was this my only choice? When I began to back up again, the nurse blocked me in. Her mouth traced the skin on my ear. You don't fire that gun. I'll fire them both for you. Your grandfather will die if you don't shoot. At least he has a chance if you try. I had two choices: shoot the gun or run for it. With the former, Grandpa had a shot at life. The latter, he didn't have a chance at all. I began to finger my cell phone in my pocket. You know, the police will never come in time. Bullets are awfully fast, Miss Tillman. Shit. Well, he was right about that. My hand still shaking, began to fondle the pistol. Grandpa stared at me with sad, pleading eyes. Could I pull the trigger? Could I possibly save his life? But then again, what if my gun was loaded? What if I pulled the trigger and ended his life instead? But he would die by my hand, not the nurse's. The lady and the tiger sprung into my mind. How much of a choice did I have? And which was the right choice? If Grandpa did live, would he really truly be happy in his massively depressed state? Would death offer him a greater sanctuary from life? And what about me? Would I be a murderer or a saint? And which one was attributed to life and death? My head spun. The gun trembled in my hand. And then, Grandpa spoke for what was probably the first time in many years. I hadn't heard him speak once since he entered the nursing home. In his old creaky voice, he said, I had to try. Tears were falling from Grandpa's sunken eyes. I did not think that I fared any better. The lady or the tiger? A life of unhappiness or a chance at heaven? Which could I possibly choose? Oh God, I'm so sorry. I frowned deeply as I pointed the gun at Grandpa. Bang! The nurse smiled at me and patted my back. Good job. I fell to my knees and sobbed. I had chosen. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end